안녕하십니까. 오늘도 아침 일찍 이렇게 많이 나와 주셔서 감사합니다. 일주일 만에 또 뵙게 돼서 반갑습니다. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This morning we have one of the most popular speakers at this forum, Mr. Sorman, as you know very well, is one of most renowned public intellectuals in Europe. He is everything, actually. He is an economist and a philosopher and a columnist and a writer, author, and public administrator. Actually, he was the deputy mayor of one of cities in Paris region, and on voluntary basis, of course. And he is an entrepreneur as well. But most importantly, he is a very good friend of Korea and the Korean people. And of course, we have known each other since late 1980s. So we've been friends for many years, many decades, actually. In fact, you know, he has been advising Korean policymakers and business leaders on various matters. But one of the things he gave me idea was when I lead G20 summit preparation, he gave me idea of holding the opening dinner at the National Museum. He's the one. So I went there, and I thought it was the best idea. And to show the G20 leaders our national treasures and part of our proud cultural heritage. And it was very, very successful. And he gave me that tip, and of course, President approved it, but I got the idea from him. But anyway, he has been a good friend of Korea, and he has been very, very helpful to our policymakers. He wrote more than 20 books, and actually many of his books been translated into Korean, as you know. In fact, this morning, he will share with us his insights on China, and he has been writing and giving lectures on China many years, and very interestingly enough, one of his books on China is titled The Empire of Lies. But I don't know. Anyway, it was translated into English. Anyway, I'm sure he will be very valuable views and from the European perspective, how Europeans see China under the new leadership, and what is the outlook, and particularly as a G2 now, what are the implications for the global order, existing order, and of course major implications for Korea and this region. I'm very sure the Guy will share his enlightening views on these matters. I don't think I need. He has a long, very, very brilliant, successful career, so I can spend all morning to talk about his achievements so far. But since you know all this, with no further ado, I would like to ask Dr. Song to moderate the session. Please join me in welcoming Sorman.
Thank you, dear Ilsa Kong. And you are one of the very first person I met when I first visited Korea. I think that was in 1986, and we had a very enlightening conversation, which I still remember today. And I'm happy enough that we were in contact through all these years. And you will very rapidly notice that this morning I suffer from an awful hiccup. So from time to time, my talk will be interrupted, and there's nothing I can do about it, except, well, in France, we say that if somebody frightens you, the hiccup goes away. So maybe one in the audience will be frightening enough, so the hiccup will go away. The topic today, I mean, there are so many things to talk about in Korea these days, but I want to narrow it to the competition between the United States and China. And I don't want, to be a prophet and to tell you what will go to happen tomorrow or next week. I mean, anybody can say that. I mean, I've not been trained as a shaman. I've been trained as an economist and political scientist. So my purpose is more to focus on the big picture, and because when you are in the situation like this, which is evolving very rapidly, you tend to lose what the big picture and what we are talking about. And after all, I mean, the history in the long run is determined by trends which are connected to the strengths of the nation. So as very much is talking these days about China replacing the United States as the leading power, I want to elaborate on this and tell you from the very beginnings that I do not agree with this vision, and that still today the United States is the only superpower. And let's start with China. I hope you get used to my hiccup, okay? And I do. China, not to diminish the successes of China since 30, 40 years, we have to understand that China is still a nation in transition. It is not yet a global economic power for many reasons. First of all, I mean, domestic poverty in China is huge, and we must not have the illusion that this is a developed country. It is a powerful country. So it's important from an economic perspective and geopolitical perspective to make a distinction between a powerful country and a developed country. We had the case with the Soviet Union 50 years ago. Everybody thought that it was a very strong country. It was not. It was only a powerful country. But when confronted to a difficult international situation, you need to have some economic strengths in order to support an ambitious geopolitical strategy. So I think this is the case with China. You have a very ambitious geopolitical strategy, but they still don't have neither the military capacity nor the economic capacity to support in the long run any geopolitics ambition. Not to elaborate too long on the Chinese weakness, size is a weakness, poverty is a weakness, lack of homogeneity is a weakness, and the economic model, which is slowly transforming, is still very much depending on low wages and export of rather unsophisticated goods. And also, much has been said these days about the success of China regarding innovation, and figures are quoted saying that there are more patents now registered by China than by the United States. But when you look into details, these patents are registered only in China, and most of these patents are not that original. They usually combine German, French, American patents, Japanese patents, and they tweak it and put it together and registered as a new patent. I mean, a good example of that is a speed railway in China. No doubt that the Chinese speed railway are the best, but if you look into details how they are made, it's basically a combination of patents which have been registered in other countries. So they are very good at tweaking and synthesizing innovation which are from abroad, but they are not 100% Chinese. Also, a weakness of China is that they do criticize in a very harsh way the international rules as defined and applied by the United States since 1945. And you can understand why a country like China is not happy about it. I remember a conversation with a member of the Chinese government in Beijing saying, how would the American react if they had a Chinese fleet on a permanent basis along the coast of California? They would not like it. And it is a fact that you have the US 7th Fleet along the coast of China on a permanent basis. So the Chinese do resent the fact that the world order is basically an American order based on American rules and rule of laws which are defined by the Americans and also partly by the Europeans. And another weakness of China, and this may come as a surprise, it is the political regime. We know very little about the legitimacy of the political regime. When President Xi Jinping, for the first time since Mao Zedong, gathered the three main powers in his hands, being the president of the state, the chief of the military, and the chief of the Communist Party, the three together. So this made him some kind of an emperor, like Mao Zedong was. But it reveals also some kind of fragility. The very need, to gather in his own hand all the power show that he doesn't trust anyone, and that maybe no one should be trusted. So the regime, which apparently seems stronger than ever, is maybe not as strong as that, and the Chinese leaders see a lot of competition from provinces, from the civil society, from intellectuals, and the private sector, which is more and more important. So the solidity and the legitimacy of the central government in China is maybe not as strong as we think. And also, we know what the Chinese don't like about the global order as imposed by the United States, but we don't know what they suggest. And actually, they suggest nothing. They do not propose a set of alternative rules. They don't propose a different world order which would be sustained by Chinese regulation or Chinese intervention. So we know that they are against, but we don't know what they are for. We know globally that they would like the US to leave this part of the world. They would like the Pacific Ocean and the countries around, like Korea, maybe Japan, and of course Taiwan and the Philippines and so on, to be part of a zone of influence as defined by China. And as you can see in many of the strategic papers which have been published in China, the idea of the world in the long term, the long run, is that the world should be divided in two parts, the Western under American control and the Eastern part under Chinese control. This is very vague because, once again, they don't say what rules acceptable by all the Eastern countries. They don't say with what military, because the Chinese military is still very much behind the American military. And they say nothing, of course, about Japan. Where would Japan stand in this vision of the world? It doesn't belong to the East, it doesn't belong to the West. It has its own policy, its own military, and its own independence. So the Chinese project is still very vague, and I don't see it right now as a competition to the US model. Now let's turn to the United States. Of course, the United States is in trouble because of the presidency of Mr. Trump, but the president is only the president. And in the United States, as you know, and we can verify on a daily basis, the system of check and balance is extremely strong. And the president can send tweets every morning, but then nothing happens. Nothing happens because he has no continuity, but also because it cannot happen. I mean, there are very few decisions that the president can take by himself. As you know, he's under the control of the parliament, of the justice, and of the military also, which are very autonomous in the United States, and at the end of the day, they do what they like, and of course under the control of the media. And President Trump gets more and more irritated by the day because he discovered that a tweet is not a decision and that nothing happens after he has tweeted. So the president is only the president, and the president will go. Let's not make a confusion between Trump and the United States. I mean, the United States are different from Trump, and they have been there before Trump, and they'll be there after Trump. Let us remind that the US is still, and I think for a long time to go, the only global economy. You like it or not, but it is a fact, not only in quantitative terms, but even more in qualitative terms. I mentioned registered patterns, and if you look at what's called triadic registered patterns, patterns which are globally applied, I mean, the United States is far, far much ahead in terms of innovation. By the way, the second is Japan. And the third is the European Union as a total, which is not totally. And China, India, Russia are far, far, far behind. And so it's not easy to catch up with the United States. It's even more difficult because so many scientists flock to the United States in order to better protect their patents. So because of this attraction of the United States and the American legal system, they attract patents and, of course, money from all over the world. And this is a place which they are not ready to abandon very easily. So the only global economy, the major source of innovation, and also the only strong soft power. And the main difference between China and the United States is that China does not pretend to impose a Chinese model to the rest of the world. I mean, they consider that the Chinese civilization is good for the Chinese, but they don't export norms, rules, which they pretend are good to the rest of the people. There's a big difference with the United States, who, rightly or wrongly, consider that the rule of law, even the Constitution, which has not been written initially for the Americans but for everybody, and also social norms, you like them or not, they all start from the United States. It can be social media, it can be the Me Too movement, it all starts from the United States. You can't imagine a Me Too movement starting from China, okay? And but it comes from the United States, and it brings a revolution all over the world. So, which means that all social and moral revolution, once again, you like it or you don't like it, but it's a fact, that they are made in the United States. Now, being a strong soft power, and of course the strongest hard power, the debate is to know how ready are the United States to employ this hard power. Okay, how ready are they to intervene in Syria, Korea, Libya, whatever else? I think you get used to my hiccups, right? So do I. So do I. And now, I think the answer to this question, will they intervene? Do they want to intervene? You look at history. From the very beginning, the Americans did not want to intervene. From the first president, from the very founding fathers, from Washington, Jefferson, they didn't want to intervene. And until the 20th century, World War I, they didn't want to intervene. They considered it was a European affair. World War II, they didn't want to intervene. It was also a European affair. Until the day where they understood that nothing is a local affair and everything puts Americans in danger. So if I were to summarize the behavior of the United States military and United States strategy, is that they don't intervene until the day they understand that they have to intervene, and they do intervene. And it has always been the case. It is the case these days in Syria, where Trump himself said, well, we are leaving, we have nothing to do here. And he did not. Okay? And same in Korea. When he was elected, you remember, he said, Korea, Japan, I mean, they should defend, it's their story, they should defend themselves alone. You don't need the United States. And these days, he discovers that he has no choice. So it's again the same story, and not to intervene, but to intervene. And also one remark, I think, which is significant of the continuity of American foreign policy, that it did not all started with Trump. You must remember that Obama was the first to bring back the troops to the United States and to say, from now on, we shall lead from behind, okay? And it didn't work because he intervened not from behind, but very actively in Afghanistan, in Syria, and Iraq. So there is this illusion of isolationism, which is very popular in the United States, and the reality, which is interventionism. Interventionism, okay. I should say a word about Europe. Europe, as you know, is a major economic actor, is a minor military actor. Not because the military is weak. I mean, the British and the French military are quite strong, but there is an agreement supported by the public opinion in both countries. The other countries have no military action, a little bit Italy. But there is a public opinion after the decolonization war was decided that enough is enough, and intervention should only be when national interests are threatened. This is why there was an intervention these days in Syria, coordinated with the United States, because, first of all, the Treaty on Chemical Weapons has not been respected, and also because France and Britain are directly impacted by the Syrian war because of the hundreds of thousands of refugees which we receive from this country. So there was a direct interest in acting in Syria just to try to stop the flux of refugees. But as a global international actor, Europe has the means to intervene, but really doesn't want. All our energy is concentrated on building a strong, solid, and unified common market, and also in soft power. I mean, one of the reasons we intervene in Syria is also to reaffirm our commitment to the rule of law. But it will not go farther. So what about the other actors? Let's turn 1 second to North Korea. And we know a lot about North Korea, of course, but to bring it to a very simple definition, it's a dictatorship. It's a military dictatorship based on exploiting its own people. This is a very simple definition, but we forget two things. We forget that in North Korea there are victims, and the victims are the North Korean people. We tend to forget that because in all the discussions about Korea, we speak and we talk and we negotiate as if there were no North Korean people. They are like the abstract, character in the play. Nobody seems very interested in the destiny of these people who are treated as slaves. And the other remark about North Korea is their ambition is not to threaten anyone. I mean, they are not going to start a war that they would lose. Their ambition, and this is why they have an atomic armament, is to preserve the status quo. The North Koreans love the status quo, and they love the regime the way it is, and they want to be recognized as a truly independent country with its own regime. And as we know, the nuclear armament has for main purpose not to attack anyone, but to protect yourself. Okay? All the countries which have nuclear armament and the nuclear bomb, except in 1945, the bomb was never used to attack anyone. The bomb is to preserve the status quo. This is why Israel has a bomb, this is why India has a bomb, this is why Pakistan has a bomb, and this is why Iran has a bomb. The nuclear bomb is to protect the very existence of the regime. And North Korea, these days, have been quite successful because everybody has forgotten about the North Korean people. The question of the human rights is not raised by anyone. And in a way, the legitimacy of the North Korean regime has been much reinforced. They are considered now like a normal country and a normal president with whom you can have a normal discussion. So their strategy, I must say, has been extraordinarily successful so far, and they are talking now equal to the United States and to China. This is always what they wanted to do, and this is what they obtained so far. So it's a bit of a paradox that Trump, in a way, has succeeded in reinforcing the legitimacy of North Korea, which means that he will not be able to destroy North Korea. You do not destroy a country with whom you have a conversation. You can enter into conversation, find some sort of a deal, maybe some sort of denuclearization in exchange for a peace treaty. There are many scenarios, of course. Something comparable to what has been signed with Iran would be possible for North Korea. Now I will finish by South Korea. I think South Korea seems to me rather fragile these days. What I mean fragile, big changes have to be implemented in the current situation. Social changes, because you have increasing unemployment among the young people. So something is not working anymore in the economic model of South Korea. Okay, growth is slowing down, which means that also the economic model maybe should be a little bit revised. The number of new companies and startups is very small, which shows a lack of dynamism in the South Korean society. The universities are not making any tremendous qualitative progress. They still remain not very open to the rest of the world. They don't attract so many foreign students and foreign professors. And the civil society has been heavily disrupted by all the political conflicts and all these judgments against former presidents. I have no opinion on the what this president did or didn't do, but it is the only country where former presidents systematically go to jail when they are not president anymore. So I was saying to Ilsa Kong that the Constitution is already revised. There is an implicit article saying all former presidents will go to jail. So no need to reform the Constitution anymore. So what I mean that I think there should be a consensus in South Korea. And to talk about a consensus in South Korea is nonsense, of course, because there never was a consensus in North Korea. But there should be at least some good people working together, like what has been did in Germany with the so-called Hearts Commission, saying what is fragile in South Korea, how are we to confront the new situation in economics, in education, in innovation, in geopolitics, how are we going to exist as an independent and democratic country in the region, vis-à-vis Japan, China, the United States, and North Korea. And I think there is this kind of fragility and unpreparedness to confront the change in South Korea right now. I may be wrong, but this is what I feel as a foreign observer and friend of South Korea. Thank you. And sorry again for my hiccup, which was not part of the program.
Thank you, Guy, for a very succinct summary of the situations of some of the major countries, including the two Koreas. With that, I'd like to open the floor. Do I see any hands of questions from the floor?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sorman. Considering the title of today's subject matter, you didn't speak too much about Xi Jinping, except just one very brief moment. But you did mention that he grabbed all three titles, etc., like Mao Zedong. But in effect, Deng Xiaoping, who didn't have any of those titles, he didn't bother, but had actually more effective control of all those three areas. Do you see that the fact that Xi Jinping has to grab all those titles means, in effect, the weakness in his part that Deng Xiaoping did not bother? He did have, in effect, all the powers, and therefore he didn't need the titles. But Xi Jinping now needs titles to want to control the nation.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Deng Xiaoping had, of course, a very significant legitimacy because of his own personal history. He was one of the founder of a new China, along Mao Zedong, and he understood the mood of the people and the necessity to turn around the economy. Xi Jinping has no historical legitimacy. His father had, but he doesn't. He's a strict bureaucrat, and he made all his career through bureaucracy. So you're right that the fact that he had to accumulate all this power is a compensation to this very fragile legitimacy and his fear. And he sees, competitive, as mentioned before, he sees competitive powers growing. He's not as sure to control the military as Deng Xiaoping did. He's not that sure to control the provinces, and he's not as that sure to control the party. So this is the contradiction of Xi Jinping. Too many powers show that maybe there is a lack of legitimacy and a lack of power. So, as you know, he has decided to erase the 10 years limit. We are not sure that the Communist Party and the military will accept that forever.
Dr. Zhang?
Thank you, Mr. Sorman, for your excellent lecture. You mentioned the weaknesses of China, but I'd like to ask you about the weaknesses of the U.S. In particular, U.S., of course, is the only superpower and in a position to project its power all over the world. But American society seems to be collapsing in the bottom. What I mean is the lower middle class. The income inequality in the U.S., as you know, very serious. I think the election of Trump was due to this income inequality, especially the lower middle class American people, really frustrated. And his tax reform is not going to reduce the inequality, but it even more, maybe increase the inequality. So inequality in America, and also I wonder, in any country where teachers have to be armed to protect their children in the school, that's a society deteriorating. So how do you evaluate this American society, big power, the only superpower, projecting its power all over the world, but its society is deteriorating. So how can these two go together? Thank you.
Okay. First of all, there are the truth and the perception of the truth. And regarding income inequality, and it's not that true because the statistics are a bit biased. For example, if you evaluate the actual income of people, you don't take into consideration that the value of many things is declining. And a car, a television, air condition, not to mention internet, which did not exist 20 years ago, all this is available to all Americans, but it doesn't appear in the statistics for equality. So I think this debate on income equality is by and large a political debate and an ideological debate. To say that the Americans are living less well today than 20 years ago, it's just not true. And they have access to better health care, and they have access to many things which didn't exist before. So if you look only at the quantitative, at the level of wage compared to other wages, you see a general increase, but the middle class increase is less than the upper class increase. So I wouldn't say that there is income equality. It's still a very homogeneous society. What is new in the United States is the emergence of a new class, which we call the super wealthy class, the super rich. So we shouldn't make, we should look differently at the two phenomena. Basically, America is a middle-class society. And this middle-class society is living fairly well. Living fairly well, again, because they have access to services which did not exist before and which are very cheap. And now you have this superclass which works in finance, and it's a superclass because they gather the wealth and the finance from all over the world. Okay, the Russian, the Chinese, the Brazilian, everybody is trusting its money to the New York-based investment fund, and this builds the superclass, and this raises the irritation exploited by Bernie Sanders during the last election. But I totally disagree with this kind of Piketty's analysis, for example, which compare things which cannot be compared. Now, you have a level of violence in the United States, which has always been there, but which, in fact, of the dramatic events which take place on a regular basis in America, and mostly in schools, the level of violence is declining, as you know. If you take big cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, crime has nearly disappeared from these cities. So what you have in America is a major problem at the school level, where there are crazy young kids which can freely use arms and kill other pupils and their colleagues. This is a major problem, but once again, you cannot say that American society is becoming more violent, because actually it is less violent, but with better media coverage. Now, what is true, and I would agree with you, is nothing is done to cope with these problems. Nothing is done to cope with the violence in schools, and nothing is done to try to contain the influence of the super rich. On the contrary, the tax reform increase the wealth of these super rich people. But this has to do, I think, with the personal agenda of Donald Trump, and probably after his agenda, America will have a far-left Democrat candidate which will go into the other direction.
If I may, I would like to go back to the point you made about the fragility of China.
Yes.
If you press the point a little bit further, does that mean that perhaps in 10 or 15 years' time, we'll see a major upheaval in China? I know you don't practice Sorman, but if the fragility, with that fragility, if the Xi Jinping continues to put pressure on the people and all the oppositions around him, I would expect that from Korea's experience, in 10 or 15 years' time, there will be a very, very major challenge which can disrupt not only China, but all the neighboring countries and the world. So I would like to see your view about that point.
Well, 10 years is a long time, so my bet, since I'm working on China, it's been now many, many years, is that the status quo will prevail for a long time. It will prevail for a long time, even if people are not happy with it. Because the true legitimacy of the regime and of the so-called Communist Party is civil peace in China. You know, China just went through 1 century of civil war and invasion, colonization, and the 20th century has been tragic for China. And you had the revolution, you had the Cultural Revolution, and so on. So people remember that. And I think everybody say that the legitimacy of the Communist Party is based on economic growth. It's certainly based on economic growth, but it's even more based on the civil peace and civil tranquility. And this is why, even after Xi Jinping is replaced, maybe in a coup d'etat, we don't know, I think that the regime basically will remain stable, and that nobody wants to take the risk to have the civil society in China disrupted again.
참고로 오늘도 아주 훌륭한 통역이 있기 때문에 한국말로도 질문을 해주시기 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much for your very good lecture. My question is that, as I believe, as the country is getting richer and wealthier, that the political system also changing. I mean that that the country tend to take the election process of selecting their leader by general election. Would it happen in China in future, sooner future? Thank you.
Well, I don't think so, because, if there were free elections in China, most of the people still are farmers. And all the economic politics in China has been to develop the cities and the industries, and not to develop the agricultural sector. So the farmers are not that happy with the communist regime. And the bourgeoisie, the city bourgeoisie in China, like the system to be like it is, and they don't want elections. Because if there were elections, the cities would be beaten by the agricultural part of China. So the Communist Party is relying mostly on cities. And there is an agreement within the cities not to have elections. So I think that's one of the paradoxical reason of the stability of the dictatorship in China, and the reason we are not ready to see elections in China. There was an attempt some years ago, which I documented, with the local election in villages. And the Communist Party wanted to check, how it works if we have free election in villages, as a laboratory. It was a disaster for the Communist Party. The leader of the Communist Party were always defeated in these local elections. So they stopped the experiment.
Mr. Sorman, thank you very much for your very insightful presentation. First, the Xi Jinping declared he will pursue the China dream, okay, jumping from so-called a peaceful rise China.
Yes.
And in the long run, you think China will ever adopt a popular democracy deviating from current communist single-party system? I mean, in order to achieve Xi Jinping's China dream, my view is that China will continue to maintain a current single-party system. But in the long run, maybe perhaps within, 40 or 50 years later, China would become like the current Indian political system, most populous nation, but still yet able to maintain the democratic political system. And second question, when the President Trump adopted the America First trade protectionism, and Xi Jinping, he declared that at Davos Forum, okay, China will carry on a flag as a rule setter for a global liberal trading system. How European leaders, including the President Macron, reacted on the Xi Jinping's remarks, becoming, claiming that the China is not the rule setter for the liberal order in the global trading system.
Sure.
And third, Korea is in the middle between China and the U.S., and the Koreans now, in a sense, very much deeply divided. One camp rooting for what we call the continental power regime, and the other one, ocean-bound regime. Especially, in the middle of the North Korean issues, we are, in a sense, very much deeply divided. What would be your recommendation for Korea to maintain as a robust, democratic, market economic system between this continental power camp and ocean-bound camp?
Well, regarding the evolution of the Chinese political system towards, let's say, sort of a more open democracy, I look at what's happening in the world since 1990. After the destruction of the Soviet Union, many observers, I'm afraid myself included, thought that was really the spring of democracy, and that all the countries which emerged from the Soviet Union would turn to be democracy. And then we had the so-called Arab Revolution, where we thought that Arab dictatorship would be replaced by democracy. It happened nowhere. It happened nowhere. It has been a big disappointment. Why? Probably because democracy needs very ancient historical roots. And if you look at Western democracies, they go back, centuries ago. Their roots are very ancient. So it's a very, I don't say it's an impossible process, but it's a very long process to transit from a dictatorship to a full-fledged democracy. It takes years, maybe it takes centuries. Look at the South Korea. You are at the beginning of the process. I wouldn't say, oh, South Korea is a full-fledged democracy. When in a full-fledged democracy, former president don't go to jail, and the society is not divided as it is right now. You are more diversity in the media. The opposition is more respected. So it's a very, very long process. And South Korea is on this road, but you are not at the end of the road, and far from it. So in former Soviet Republic, or in former communist states like China, it takes years, maybe it takes decades, maybe it takes centuries. You need to have the intellectual roots, you need to have the social roots to build a democracy. So I'm not very optimistic, even in 10, 20 years, that we shall see an evolution. And also remember, when the internet started and all the social media, people said, well, with internet, social media, this is the end of dictatorship, and everybody will be well informed, will be able to create his political group, and so on. It did not happen. On the contrary, the social media, internet has been used by authoritarian regime to reinforce their authority. So things went in the other direction that optimistic prophets were predicting. Okay, this will be my remark. The question about Trump was about what? Protectionism or what? What do you want to know about Trump? If you look at the Trump policy, is there a policy? We don't know. No, it's interesting because after one and a half year, we really don't know. We have a lot of talks, a lot of declaration, but they are very contradictory. You look at the Pacific Free Trade Agreement, okay? During the campaign, he said he would leave it. Now he wants to be back, okay? And what about the Iranian agreement? He said it was a very bad agreement, but America is still within the agreement. It's been 18 months. And he said he would never negotiate with North Korea. Now he's ready to negotiate with Rocket Man, and on and on. So it's extremely difficult to define his policy. And also, I think it's even more difficult because, as I said before, America is a system of check and balance. And the president is only the president. And the president has what Theodore Roosevelt called the pulpit power. He had the power to explain, to convince the people. But if the people are not convinced, and if the military doesn't follow, if the business community doesn't follow, nothing happens. You look at the taxes on soya bean, and the Chinese said, okay, we don't buy any soya bean from Iowa anymore. So the Iowan people went to Trump and said, no way, we want free trade with China. And Trump says, okay, no taxes on China because you need to sell your soya bean. So it's very difficult to grasp what is the sense of this America First policy. Same with immigration. And there's been a lot of talk about limiting immigration. Well, you may be for it, you may be against it, but the number of immigrants is still the same. It's still the same. And also, which is interesting about the American Constitution, if you want to arrest an illegal immigrant in New York or in Los Angeles, you must call to the local police. And the local police, actually the mayor of New York and the mayor of Los Angeles, same in Chicago, said no, we will not arrest illegal immigrants. They call that sanctuary city. And Trump went to the court and say, well, I don't like sanctuary city. And the court said, well, you don't like it, but there's nothing you can do against it. So immigrants, illegal immigrants, are not arrested. So once again, to summarize, the Constitution, as in 1789, has been written in the United States exactly for Mr. Trump. I mean, the founding fathers had in their mind what happened if an authoritarian president becomes president. How do we limit his power? And they had this fantastic notion of checks and balance where the Congress, the Senate, and the Supreme Court can stop the president if he becomes unpredictable. This is exactly what is happening. Now, I'm sorry, you mentioned protectionism.
South Korea's position.
Yeah. South Korea position is it's very complicated because first of all, the country is not unified, and I think there is no consensus in South Korea on nothing, not on free market, not on what kind of strategy and relationship with Japan. What about North Korea? I mean, some people in South Korea, I think a minority, is ready to accept the neutralization of the Korean Peninsula in exchange for peace. Well, it will be the end of South Korea as a democracy, of course, but many people don't think that far. So I don't think there is a consensus. I even don't see a national debate on this. And from an exterior observer, I think that the South Koreans love the status quo. After all, I mean, the situation is not that bad. And it's a modern country, it's a growing economy, it's a rather peaceful country. And so as long as it goes like that, it's okay. Maybe what South Koreans do not see is that maybe the status quo can be maintained as it is. And maybe some decisions have to be made regarding the economic strategy, regarding the employment sector, regarding the relationship with China, Japan, and North Korea. It seems now that neither the president nor the opposition have a very clear and strong strategy which is debated by the people. I think the people live like in a bubble in South Korea, hoping that things will go like that forever. So maybe they will, maybe they will not. And I am a bit worried, once again, as a foreign observer and a friend of Korea, that there is no more debate and consensus on what is to be done if there is a major economic or international crisis. And I'm very worried also by the division. Very few people talk about that, but I think the division within the country are very severe. And the fact that the president may be very popular right now, and that there are many things, if anything happens, the country will appear extremely divided, and the relationship between the majority and the opposition could be extremely violent and not that democratic at all. But I may be wrong. I may be wrong. Yes, madam.
Yes.
Professor Sorman, thank you for your illuminating lectures on everything about China and USA, Europe, and South and North Korea. So you just a minute ago you talked about status quo of South Korea, but before you talked that the North Korea, this Kim Jong-un regime, its intention is to maintain status quo by developing their nuclear bomb and missiles. But as a citizen of Republic of Korea, I love free democracy and free market. So I would like to see that United Korea under the regime of free democracy and free market. But it seems like that it is not. But before, about 10 years ago, many South Korean people are very hopeful about that kind of United Korea. Now, it seems remote because of this North Korea's nuclear bomb and missile. So what do you expect that in 10 years, we will see the United Korea with free democracy by the help of United States and probably by Japan? Because I am sure that China and Russia will not like United Korea on the free democracy.
Again, you ask me about what's going on in 10 years. So, okay. Well, in 10 years, I hope my hiccup will be away. I'm not sure. I think things, the pace of history is very slow, actually. I remember the very first time I was in South Korea, that was maybe 30 years ago, and the people already asked me about reunification. And do you see reunification next year, in 10 years? I say no. I say no. It's a very complicated process. It's a very slow process. And to tell the truth, nobody wants reunification that much. And even 30 years ago, it was easier because 30 years ago in South Korea, there was still many family connections, and there was a kind of, sentimental relationship with North Korea, which is not the case anymore. It's not the case anymore. I mean, even if you have family in North Korea, it's very remote. Very remote. It's not family anymore. It has become a different country. So this makes reunification even more difficult and more unpredictable. And also, South Korea has become so much richer than North Korea. The economic incentive on top of the family incentive is even less than it was 30 years ago. So on the South Korean side, you cannot say that there is a strong desire for reunification. In China, the Chinese love the situation it is now. The only hope for China, sooner or later, they would obtain the neutralization of the whole peninsula. But this is a very, very long-term goal. They have that in their mind, but they know it's a very long-term goal. Of course, Japan doesn't want reunification. They don't want a strong Korea at their door. So who is for reunification, after all? Nobody. Nobody. The North Koreans are happy the way they are, because if there were reunification, they would disappear as a dictatorship, okay, and they would have much to lose. So if I was to make a bet, even 10 years from now, I think the status quo would still be the same. What you can hope for is a smoother relationship between North and South Korea, more economic exchanges, a more open border, and joint ventures, and maybe North Korea taking the road toward economic reforms, something similar to the Chinese model. But I think that the best bet that we can do right now, and once again, back to the nuclear armament in North Korea, we have to keep in mind that the North Koreans want this nuclear armament to remain independent. Okay, they don't want to bomb anyone. they don't want to bomb South Korea, they don't want to bomb the United States because they would disappear overnight. And what we know when you learn about global strategy is that the role of the nuclear armament is conservative, okay? Is to keep things the way they are, the way they are. So maybe they could accept, like the Iranian, some sort of denuclearization in exchange, for example, as I said before, a peace treaty or economic exchange or joint venture, but also denuclearization, like in Iran, doesn't stop you to restart the nuclear program overnight. So I think we are going maybe toward an agreement where they say, of course, we denuclearize. What do we get for that? How much? How much in economic terms, recognition, peace treaty, joint venture, money, and all that. But they could restart the program any day. That's the Iranian situation. So this is the way I see things. But regretfully, I do not forecast any major democratization, opening, or liberation of North Korea. And once again, as I said before, nobody has a strong interest in the North Korean people. They are not part of the negotiation. Nobody mentioned them. Not the American, even not the South Korean. I mean, the President Moon said that human rights will not be on the agenda. And as there is this tacit agreement to forget about the North Korean people, we will go into that direction, which will reinforce the North Korean regime, but certainly do not favor an evolution toward a more free society.
Yes, Dr. Zhang.
I like to ask two questions. First one is a follow-up of my earlier question. My question is, do you think American protectionism will survive Trump? In other words, even if Trump disappears for some reason, I suggest, since Trump phenomena is not an accident, but it's based on the American people's frustration, and America is losing confidence. America and the United Kingdom, two great powers who have ruled the world the last 200 years. Both countries are losing confidence in the system, free trade and so forth. So my first question is, how enduring do you think the American protectionism will it survive Trump? Second question is about your country, great country. And you seem to have a great leader. I don't know, reading the newspapers. And two questions related. One, Europe-wide, there's a tendency to move to extreme right? But France is staying in the middle or in the right course, and your president, Macron, he's doing right things, including labor market reform. So could you tell us a little bit about your country, what's going on in your country? Thank you.
Okay. Protectionism in the United States is like isolationism. So from time to time, you have some demagogue and populist leader advocating isolationism. We have nothing to do with the rest of the world, or advocating protectionism. We must protect our market, but it doesn't go for long because it makes no sense. It makes no sense because protectionism cannot be enforced, and protectionism is only based on the ignorance of the people. Because, for example, the United States want to stop import from a Korean wash machine. And suddenly the consumers discover that the washing machine will cost twice more. And they say, no, we don't like that. We want the old model. And so protectionism is basically propaganda. And first, it doesn't apply, and it cannot. Because anyway, exchanges goes both ways, and exchange can go through Canada, for example. If you cannot export directly to the United States, you export to Canada and to Mexico. And from there, there's free trade between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. So from a technical perspective, it doesn't work. And from an economic perspective, it also doesn't work. It's really based on the total ignorance. And Trump is talking about protectionism, but nothing happens. And so, the successor may talk or not talk about protectionism, but again, nothing will happen. And also the big mistake made by Trump, who is not well trained in economics, is he says, well, we lose too much money in trade with China. Thank God, because without losing money to China, how would the Chinese finance the US budget deficit? It is through trade losses and trade imbalance that the country which make money on trade have dollars which they can reinvest in buying treasury bonds. Okay? So this is totally absurd, and it won't go on for long. And what about France? We have a fairly good president, and with fairly good ideas, which are not all approved by the French people. Is not that popular because the French love the status quo, like every country, and they love their labor law because nobody could be fired, and they love the huge bureaucratic system where you spend your life without working and without being fired either. And he understands perfectly well that this is not the way to grow. So he's dismantling this kind of bureaucracies, but he's doing it with very slowly, in my mind too slowly, and it brings a lot of reaction and strikes. So we don't know yet what will be the end of the story. And it's really too early to know. And there is a discrepancy between Macron, who is a very attractive and young person, what he says and what he does. He doesn't. He says the right things, but he does things halfway, which I think is not good, because when you do things halfway, you have 100% of hostility. If you do things the right way, you have also 100% of hostility, but at least you get it for real, okay, for something. So he has not yet found the right balance between how to govern, how to convince the people, and how to confront the hostility. But for sure, it is the best president we had since a very, very, very long time. Very long time, for sure, yes. And we are much happier than the other countries in Europe to have Macron as a president. But once again, he's only the president. He's only the president. There is always we forget that in democracy, presidents are only the president. And there are no despots, there are no kings, you know. They have to deal with the parliament, they have to deal with the media, they have to deal with these trade unions, they have to deal with the opposition. So it's a very tough job, you know. It's not only, I should do this and I will do that. No, it doesn't work like that, nowhere. That's the beauty of democracy, is that nothing works, neither for good, nor for bad, okay? But we are in France heading into the right direction.
Yes.
The Americans are first.
Microphone, please. We hope France will succeed because we're keenly monitoring the progress in France as far as the labor reform is concerned, because labor reform is one of the issues we have in Korea. very divided views and
Yes.
have no consensus at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, while we're on the subject of Europe, why is what's happening in Poland and Hungary happening? I know there's a recent book by two Harvard political scientists about how democracies die, and his
Yes.
point was maybe in the old days democracies died because of sudden movements like coup d'etat or other collapse or Allende and other things, but democracies can actually die by truly democratic means, by truly totally legitimate means. And should Europe or the rest of the world be worried about whether Poland and Hungary can be an example of what can be contagious or not?
Yes. Once again, I mean, it's very important to evaluate a situation in an historical perspective. So to understand what's going on in Hungary and in Poland, you have to look at the Hungarian and the Polish situation. These countries have been independent since a very recent time. They have been really independent after World War I, so only 1 century. So they still have a strong sense that their sovereignty is not totally recognized. So the notion of sovereignty in France means nothing. I mean, France is a sovereign country since the Middle Ages. Hungary and Poland, not yet. So they still feel threatened by their neighbors. In Poland, they feel threatened by Germany and by Russia. Sorry. In Hungary, they feel threatened by the European Union. So there is a strong case in politics to affirm their sovereignty. Second, these countries not only are new democracies, but they have very little democratic experience. You know, you have they were fascist countries after World War II. First, sorry. Afterward, they were communist countries. So they are democratic countries with competing elections and parties only since 1990. That's yesterday. As I said before, you do not build a democratic culture in 1 generation. So it's very different from other countries in Europe. They are in the learning process, and so you have to forgive them many mistakes for doing that. Okay, and also the risk of contagion is non-existent because they are so specific, and you don't have similar experiences in the rest of Europe. So the question is, and it's not easy to answer, what should Europe do? Because the success of Orban and Kaczynski in Poland is largely due to economic growth. But economic growth is totally financed by the European Union. So Europe is building, you know, infrastructure, airport. When you go to Hungary or Poland, everything is new. But it has been built with taxpayers' money from the rest of Europe. So what should we do? Should we stop the subsidies and say, well, you don't respect the rule of law? Or should we consider that they are in a historical process which is slow, and still helping them to get to a true democracy? So right now, the decision which have been taken by the European Union leaders is to go slowly, to be careful. You are breaking the rule of law, you are not respecting the country, but the treaty, but we understand that it is a slow process. And by the way, not in Hungary, but in Poland, I think the opposition will win the next election anyway.
Okay, I feel like continuing this thought-provoking discussion and exchange of views, but since we are limited by our time, as many presidents are limited by their terms, I'd like to invite Chairman Il Sagong to give his short comment, if you have any. If not,
I think you stop GitHub.
okay.
Thank
then
you.
with that, why don't we show our appreciation to Mr. Sorman in our usual way.